So, Volvo Amazon 140 and PV544. Let's take a look at replacing the seals on the steering box. Before we progress to why you might decide to do so, just take a look at this over here. This is the Africa spec oil bath air filter. So wonderful for those dusty climates. However, for UK, it's just really not the right air filter. So I'll be changing this for the Zenith pancake type paper element one. But lovely to see a car with it. Very nice indeed. Okay, if we come in and have a look, I'll show you what made us decide to rebuild this steering box. Last week, I filled the steering box full of EP8090 oil, and you can see how far it's dropped down there. It's, well, you know, it should be right up the top here, and we've dropped a good inch down there. Also, take a look at here. This is where the steering fluid's all dumping out. You can also see how oily on this side down there. And if we come out and look on my ramps, we can also see where all that steering fluid has dumped itself. This is simply a case of replacing the bottom oil seal and the top steering column oil seal on it. Okay, so first of all, we drop off the centre tie rod end, and then we'll drop the steering arm off. Frequently you'll find, if they're fairly recent replacements, that the nuts are 17mm AF, but if they're very old units, then they will still be imperial. Now this Sykes Pickervant tool is my preferred ball joint splitter because it almost always does it without damaging. That's why I use this. On it goes. Okay, and then the steering arm. There we go. That's the two steering components cleared away. Next are the three 9/16 AF nylocks securing the steering box. So now it's off with the steering coupling. And we'll just mark up the orientation on this to make life easier later. So the eagle-eyed amongst us will have spotted that when I took out the coupling, that there was no horn wire going down the centre of the column, emanating at the bottom of the steering box. And the reason for this is that this car has had electric steering conversion, and they sorted the horn out upstream. On the topic of electric steering, unless you have a medical problem, it is a really bad idea. The car should behave very precisely, very accurately on the road. As soon as you put in assisted steering, the car just doesn't become the performance vehicle that it was in its day. You have downgraded it. But I fully understand there are medical reasons why you would choose to fit electric steering in these cars. But if you don't have that reason, don't do it. If the steering feels heavy, that's because the steering geometry has been set up badly, not because the car has an inherent fault. That's my bit. Thank you. So now we're clear at the top, we're clear at the bottom, so we should be able to remove this unit. Obviously, the servo is going to be slightly awkward, but it should come out. One bolt. That's 2 bolts. The bottom one is actually frozen in a bit, so let's with my copper mallet so I don't damage the threads. Let's move through. Now let's see what space we have. Ah, there we go, look. Okay, that's my 3rd bolt then. Draw it forward, upwards, and out comes the steering box. And now we're just going to invert it to drain what remains of the oil. And there we go, we just saw a drip of oil then just come out from the bottom seal. Okay, I'll go and clean it, and then we'll get to work on replacing the 2 seals. Right, first of all, we just pop off the yoke at the end. That's a 9/16 AF. because this shaft is going to draw all the way through the steering box. Just open up the split joint a little bit. Now, fundamentally, there's nothing difficult about rebuilding this steering box. In practice, there are a couple of nasty bits, and one is removing the arm off the box itself. And this will generally come free like a cannon shot. And in so doing, if you haven't already removed the top, it can often take this centerpiece of the alloy steering box top and detonate it straight out, so you destroy your steering box top. So we always remove the top first. So we take the lock nut off the adjuster. Then there's 4 13mm AF bolts. And then screw in the adjuster, which will have the effect of lifting the steering box top. There it goes. And there's your steering box top. So now we pop off the lock nut. every chance that components will go shooting across the bench here due to the reaction when we do eventually pull the arm off. So let's just put that there. We've tightened that up. Let's go. And that's exactly how it goes. On the vertical shaft, there are 3 rings. 1, 2, 3. The middle one is a big diameter. And this cannot clear this face. So what you actually have to do is turn this slightly off center so that you've got maximum distance between that ring in there and that ring in there. So it is slightly off center, as you can see, and that's how this then should draw vertically out. There we go. Nicely out with the copper mallet. And then we just draw it through the bottom bush. There we go. That's the main centre component out. Now we take the end plate off. So 13mm AF bolts. And we draw that out with its tube, and the tube basically prevents the oil from dripping out down through the horn wire hole there. So there's that. Note also that there's a couple of spacer shims here, but they could also be still attached as they are to the steering box. I think that's it. Now, we just if we just gently tap on the end of this shaft here, then out comes the bearing race. And we can now withdraw the lower column, complete with its bearings. There we go. The lower column out. Now we can start working on it. What we have to do is pop out this seal and this seal and replace them, and that's it. So I'm going to go and clean this up once again, and we'll be back to do the seal replacement. Okay, it's worth just gently polishing up the entire of this shaft, because when you replace it, the entire length will go through the top seal, and therefore if you've got rust and debris on here, it will damage the seal as you fit the shaft. So let's just go through and lightly polish the whole lot with some tape. And avoid going onto the bearing surface with your tape, of course. On the earlier steering boxes, there was actually a datum mark here, which corresponded to the vertically top mark on the steering box itself when you reassemble it. But actually, you don't need it, so that's why it disappears later. But yeah, just worth observing that if you've got an earlier steering box, you will have a datum mark here that's used for when reassembling. Equally, with your favourite bit of Scotch pad, just rub down this bit of shaft here, because of course the bottom seal needs a nice clean surface around about this area here. So a bit of Scotch pad and lightly clean that up to make sure everything is a nice surface. So that's the top seal. Gently lodge your tool underneath and out it comes. Bottom seal. There we go. And then just go and clean up the debris from around there. So, in with the bottom seal first. And then the top seal. That's our new seals fitted. So, in the words of Mr. Haynes, assembly is the reversal of removal. I'm going to put just a gentle smear of grease down the length of the shaft, just to try and avoid doing any damage to that bottom seal at all. We pop on the bearing and very careful to avoid damaging that seal. We run the splines through. Now we're on the shaft. Take it all the way through. There we go. And the cup. Tap it home with your copper washer. Spacer washer. There we go. And it's my belief, although I've not found it stated anywhere, that the shimming plates were all put on with just a little bit of pipe sealant to prevent any of the oil coming out from here out to leak past the shims. So that is exactly what I do now, but I've not actually seen it written anywhere that this was the case. goes the end plate. In go the bolts. And I take those to 21 Newton meters. So, gentle smear of grease on the shaft, as before, just to protect it a little bit as it goes through the seal. We offer it in, lower it gently, and we have this aligned so it's just, so that the centre ring is just a little aft of the orthogonal line. And as you can feel there it goes, drops in nicely, and there we are. Look at that, it's all in. So we now assemble the top plate. Use a bit of grease just to encourage the gasket to stay more or less in the same place, but to be honest, everything's going to twist around as you assemble this, so you just have to be careful to keep checking you haven't pinched it. On it goes. And we unscrew the adjuster. As the top cover approaches the casing, just keep it rotating gently to make sure the lip engages gently inside of the gasket rather than fouling the gasket. Now what we can do now is loosely fit the 4 bolts just to guide everything and keep everything in line. Keep just gently wiggling it, but unscrew, and then you'll come across the stop there. It's very distinctive. There it is. Okay, so we're going to stop there now and tighten up the bolts. And once again, I'm going to go for 21 Newton meters. So now we're going to do the initial setup of the adjuster. You'll have to do it again when it's on the car because there's always a bit more lash becomes clear when it's under load. So the reason there was a datum marked on these, on the early ones, was so that you knew exactly where dead ahead was. So we're just going to have to work that out. Okay, so I've gone full left lock. I've put a datum on the shaft and that vertical datum on the steering box. Now we go to full right lock. That's 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, 4 turns, and a bit. And now that's there. So, from lock to lock, we've got 4 turns and a little bit. So dead center is right between them. Let me just show you that again. Full left lock. 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, 4 turns, and a bit. So now, if I now back off 2 turns, 1, 2, and centralize it between the 2 datums, I am now in the dead ahead position, i.e. the position which has least backlash between the adjustment and the shaft. As you now turn the steering column off center from there, there will necessarily be some backlash, and that is exactly how the system is supposed to work. Obviously, if you actually adjusted this off center, then when you got center, it would be way over tight. That feels a bit too tight actually, so I'm just going to back it off half a turn, and that feels nice. So we can pop on the lock nut. I'm only going to put it on hand tight because we're going to be adjusting it on the car later. Okay, the next task is to put the pitman arm on. Now, on the top just here, there is a datum mark stamped in the base of the shaft. In this case, we're pointing straight that way. And if we look at our pitman arm, we see the corresponding datum is just there. So you just need those 2 lines to line up. Pop it on, and there it is. That datum is exactly pointing towards this datum here. So therefore, the pitman arm is on correctly. And we put the lock nut back on. Now, there are several different threads used on this, and all of them are incredibly difficult to find a proper nylock for. So we generally, where we can't actually find a new lock nut, we'll actually just put a bit of Loctite on the thread and use the old nut. On it goes. What's the torque? Now the torque for this nut is actually 170 to 200 Newton meters. I don't have a torque wrench that does that, so actually I just do it up smartly with my bar. There you go. And that explains why this rockets off when you do disassemble it. There we go. We're going to put the yoke on now. Just a little bit of copper slip just to assist its way in. That is the datum we established earlier before it came off the car. And here it is, the yoke. So, lift that up. Check that it looks sensible, which it does indeed. If it comes around more. And in goes the pinch bolt with its new nylock. Now I'm not going to fully tighten the pinch bolt at this point. I'm just going to take the slack out of it. And the reason is, when we put in the new rubber coupling, we will want to adjust this so that the coupling isn't stressed either too tight or too loose, being pulled too loose. and so we will be moving this up or down the shaft to compensate. And in fact, to that end, I'll put it on just a little bit tight. There we go. There, so now it should be moving up the shaft when we want to fit the coupling. So, we're ready to offer it up to the motorcar. Okay, preparing to load the steering box back in. We take the old coupling and pop out the 4 sleeves from it. There we go. Now this coupling didn't look too bad in the car, but now that we've got it off, look at that, right the way through. That's not too good, but basically it's very much, there's a big crack across there as well, it's very much destroyed. So the point here is that if your coupling doesn't look lovely, then it's probably rubbish. So be very critical about your steering coupling when assessing it in situ. And we just pop in those 4 sleeves. Now we're ready to go to the car. Okay, we'll lay out the kit. So that's our three new nylocks for the bolts. There's my 3 bolts. Now put a fairly generous smear of copper slip right down the length of these. It is not unknown for these to corrode into position. Obviously if you've just done this job it's unlikely to happen, is it? But still, just be generous with your copper slip on those bolts. Now I've already filled this with EP80 gearbox oil, pretty much to the top, because it's easier on the bench than it is in the car. But when you have got this loaded into the car, then this is what we tend to use as our topping up tube, which makes it very clean, stops you getting it dumping oil into the webbing here, and it's about the right volume as well. So, I presume your engine is in situ, so therefore you probably prefer to put your bolts in first, otherwise you might actually run out of a bit of space to get them in. There we go, and we load it in. Front bolt's just catching a bit on the timing cover, but we're almost there. There we go, that's the top aft, forward bolt and bottom aft bolt, all in place. Now we'll wind up the ramps and go and secure those from underneath. Let's go. Make sure your nice fat washers are back on. There we go. Now we're not actually going to fully tighten at this stage because I want to be able to move the steering column such that it marries up nicely with the upper column. So at this point we're just going to take the slack out of it without finally torquing them down. Back those two off a bit. Good. That's good. There we go. First of all, we're going to get dead center on the steering. Okay, that's half 1, 1.5, 2, that's 2 turns. Okay, so we have our steering coupling. We pop in the bolt with its washer. The ridges are up. These 2 ridges are effectively seat the bolt head. Okay, so the washer goes on hard against the rubber, so insert it down there. There we go. On with the nylock. Then we couple it to the upper column. There we go. On with the nylock. Oh, I've got that washer upside down. Let's go and sort that out. There we go, that's better. Now if we look at this gap here between the coupling and the upper column, we can see that this lower yoke needs to slide closer to the upper. So with our copper mallet, and that should allow everything to seat very naturally and improve the longevity of that steering coupling. So let's do up those nuts and bolts. Half-inch AFs. We're just going to see if we can tap that flange up any further, but I don't think we can. I think that will be up against it. Up against the pinch bolt now. So that's as good as we're going to get it. Now we'll do up the pinch bolt. go. And you go back under and tighten up the steering box bolts. And now the steering gear. The easy way to do the steering gear, obviously as the nylock bites the thread, it tends to turn the ball in its socket instead of tightening. So what we do is we apply a light pressure underneath here to lock the ball spindle in its conical seat. Like so. And the centre tie rod. We have two tasks remaining now, so let's just get it in the dead ahead position again. So that's half a turn, 1 turn, 1.5, and 2 turns. Now, what we're aiming for is when I joddle this upper shaft here around the dead ahead position, we see an immediate and direct response at the pitman arm. Now this is going to be a fairly iterative task, so this looks fairly good at the moment. So what I'm going to do is gently nip off the lock nut, and we'll take it up the lane and back again and see if any more play has been introduced. The other task that's remaining for us is also to centralise the steering wheel. Okay, so the eagle-eyed amongst you will have noticed when I put the steering coupling on that I forgot to use my datums that I'd carefully marked on the upper column. So I've actually fitted it 180 degrees out. Now, so we've driven up the road, and that is dead ahead. As you can see, we're just slightly left of centre, and that does look about a spline to me, so it is actually worth taking it one right anyway. So let's see how you sort out your steering wheel alignment. This is a non-standard motor steering wheel, so it can be a bit more awkward to get off. In this instance, we just pull the horn push off, Down here is the horn contact. Off comes the lock nut. Now if this was a standard steering wheel, this is the rather lovely tool we would use, because it's got two tapped holes in the steering wheel boss. You nip those up into the tapped holes and then screw down on this and off it pops all nice and gently. Motor sadly doesn't have those, but often one can just do that with it and it will come off. There it goes. Okay, so we put it in the right direction. There's the indicator cancelling pip, so turn the collar around so it's vertically up. There we go. And we put the steering wheel back on again. And then we take it out for a little test drive up our drive and check that it is indeed in the dead ahead position, at which point I'll then torque down the lock nut and put the horn push back on. So there we go, that's how to set up your steering wheel alignment. Now let's go up the front and see how the free play looks like at the steering adjustment itself. Now what we're about to do now is setting up the steering box correctly. There are some MOT testers out there who do not understand how a steering box works and may well fail you incorrectly on a sloppy steering. When the MOT tester tests it, he must have the steering wheel in the dead ahead position. Any other position has got play in the steering. It's the way it works. So, the first thing you start off with is ensuring that your steering wheel is dead ahead position. Now, to show you what I'm up to, I'm just going to put a purple mark here, there. And what we do is we joddle the lower column through about 5 degrees, like that. And what I want to see down here on the pitman arm is an immediate response, which is looking perfect. Now let me show you what's bad then. If I slacken off the lock nut and undo it by one turn, there. So now I've got 5 degrees of oscillation in my column and no response down at the pitman arm. Okay, so that is sloppy and the MOT station would be quite correct. So if we now just put that back in, if I go just 3/4 of a turn there, you can just see it appearing. A little bit of motion in the pitman arm. So I'm going to lock it off there. I'm happy with that. There we go. Keep an eye on it, because when you've just rebuilt this box, things can settle down. And so you might find yourself with a bit of play after the event. So just keep an eye on it for the first couple of 100 miles. There we go. So what have we done? We have replaced the seals on our steering box, which was the initial fault. We have seen how to set up the steering wheel adjustment, so it is actually dead ahead when you're steering dead ahead. And we've seen how you correctly adjust the steering box itself. If that top adjuster is disappearing into its lock nut, then somebody has heavily over adjusted it, and you probably need to do a full rebuild of all the bushes in the steering box, as well as just the seals. Well, my task today is over. Thank you very much.